making really good progress in the development of the HTTP controller for AV receivers. You see some of the code behind me over my shoulder here. I'll give you a closer look at that in just a few minutes, but at this stage, I thought it'd be useful for you to have a little bit more of a view of the network layout behind what we're doing here. So I'm going to cut away for a couple minutes and give you that overview so that you have some additional context. So enjoy this, and I'll be right back. To give you a view into the networking associated with the creation that we're putting together, I thought this visual aid would be helpful. So far, we've been working with the Raspberry Pi, pictured here, and we've been working with one of my development machines. And to test the code that I've written to date, I've been sending commands directly from my development machine to the Raspberry Pi and assessing the responses accordingly. And that's worked well. In our production deployment, obviously, we won't be using my development machine as a user interface. We'll actually have some other device or devices like iPads, iPhones, and probably even smart speakers. So as we move forward, we want to introduce into the testing scenario the ability to use, I'll call it an intermediary, a server of sorts, which in the deployment that I'm targeting, the code that we place on this server, pictured here, will actually live on the same Raspberry Pi. But in my dev environment, keeping things as isolated as possible. So the idea in this next phase of testing is I'll be sending those same post commands from my dev machine to this server, which runs a web server, and we'll have some scripts in PHP, written in PHP, that will respond accordingly. And as the PHP script does its job, it will then communicate with the Pi to perform those same functions that had been performed earlier. Again, the goal here is to make sure that as we move further out to the actual user interface devices, that we continue to be able to manipulate the receivers accordingly. And I just realized that I hadn't pictured the receivers in this diagram, but if I wanted to do that, I might do something like this. All right, so we have the Denon receivers also connected to the network. And then as the Pi receives instructions, then it will communicate with the receiver over the network and perform the requested operation. And so that's it. It's a visual aid to kind of keep you in sync with where we are as this evolves, and hopefully it makes sense. You can see now that all of the code is under source control, so that's cool. I've got the sharing set up and making good progress. You can see some changes here. It looks like I am on the right branch, so I will, open a few files. README will open the automation controller and post code. So if I take a look at these, here's the readme.md, which in previous videos was effectively empty, but I've got some good notes here and kind of an understanding of how the vision came together and how I see this evolving. So this will be useful as we invite others to participate in and contribute to what we're doing here. Here, the Python controller, you've seen this before. There have been some refinements in preparation for adding the middle tier, so to speak, but this is coming along nicely. I'm going to be doing some testing in a little bit just to make sure that this continues to function as the middleware code sends commands to it, and then it refers the appropriate instructions over to the receivers. And then finally, that middleware piece written in PHP that I've talked about. In my lab, these components, the middleware piece, will be separate from the Python code, as I have a web server here in dev that I can use. In production, or at least the first production deployment in my parents' house, this stuff will live together. So that Raspberry Pi, in addition to the Python process, will also be running an Apache web server, will also be running PHP. So it should be good. Looking forward to seeing it evolve even further than it has. Pleased with the progress so far, and excited about the collaboration. So, quick look. Here's this has been the 4th installment in the series. I do see some of the comments that at least some of you find this interesting to follow the evolution. So it's pretty cool to be able to put it together and bring you along for this fun journey. Stay tuned, and you will see me in the next one.